I'd like to go more deeply into some of the things we have been considering here this summer, and we'll add some historical details and also some factual things in the next few days. Today I intend to draw your attention to some historical facts and then present you with some conclusions drawn from a deeper study of these, and particularly from the revelations of some historical figures. Initiates of the mysteries have, through the ages, always said one thing, rightly so. It is that if one does not know how to judge the two streams in philosophical life properly, two streams we have been considering, idealism and materialism, one will be in danger of either falling through a trap door into a poky little cellar hole, or coming to a dead end in the search for a philosophy of life. The cellar has been considered by initiates of all times to be dualism, where one does not find the bridge from ideas, spiritual thinking tinged with theory, to the sphere of matter, of material things. And the dead end one may reach in following different ways of looking at the world, when one does not manage to balance idealism against materialism, is what initiates call fatalism. In more recent times, there has been a definite tendency to take a dualistic view, and on the other hand, to be fatalistic, though there are things which those taking the present day views fail to admit or do not even realize. To begin with, I would like to take one individual who lived in the evening twilight of the fourth post-Atlantean era, just in general outline, with reference to the philosophy of life, and then look at others who are more characteristic of our present-day philosophy of life, of the fifth post-Atlantean era. One highly characteristic figure with regard to Western philosophy of life was Augustine of Hippo, who lived from 354 to 430 of the Christian era. Let us recall some of Augustine's thoughts, for as you can see from the dates, he lived in the evening twilight of the fourth post-Atlantean era, which came to a conclusion in the 15th century. It is clearly evident that this conclusion was approaching, starting from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th post-Christian centuries. Augustine gained impressions of many different philosophies of life. We have spoken of this before. Above all, Augustine came to know Manichaeism and skepticism. His soul took in all the impulses which one gains when, on the one hand, one sees all that is ideal, beautiful, and good, everything that is filled with wisdom, and then also everything which is bad, evil. And we know that in Manichaeism people sought to manage, putting it crudely, but it can also be put in this way, with these two streams in the philosophies of life, so that in a way they accepted eternal polarity, opposition persisting forever between light and darkness, good and bad, wisdom-filled and evil. In Manichaeism, people only managed with this dualism by connecting certain ancient pre-Christian concepts with this acceptance of the polarity of phenomena in the world, and above all, connected certain ideas, which can only be understood if one knows that in earlier times people used an atavistic clairvoyance to see into the spiritual world. Ideas that those visions were similar in content to the impressions gained through sensory perception. Having taken in such ideas, I'd say, of the supersensible as seemingly sensible, Manichaeism gave the impression for many people of making the spiritual material, of envisaging the spiritual in forms that are sense perceptible. This is a common mistake made also in more recent philosophies, including more recent theosophy, as I've been telling you the other day. Augustine gave up Manichaeism for the very reason that he could no longer bear the way things were made sensible material. That was one of the reasons why he gave it up. Augustine then also went through skepticism, which is a justifiable philosophy of life, insofar as it makes people aware that merely considering anything which is to be gained from the sense-perceptible world, and the experiences and events in the sense-perceptible world, will not tell them anything about the supersensible. And if one then also holds the view that one cannot gain the supersensible as such, one will doubt if truth is to be found at all. Augustine also went through this doubt without knowing the truth. He gained the most powerful impulses from this. Now, in order to make you understand what really gave Augustine the position he had in Western philosophy, I have to refer to the main element in his point of view, a point from which all the light shone out that lived in Augustine, and was indeed the main point in his last philosophy of life. It is the point which we may characterize as follows. Augustine realized that human beings can only be certain, truly certain, with a certainty free from all delusion, if they refer to their own inner experience. Everything else can be uncertain. It is impossible to know if the things we see with our eyes, hear with our ears, things that make an impression on any of our senses, truly are constituted the way our senses make us assume. We cannot even know what this world actually looks like if we close our eyes and ears and other senses to it. That is how people think, who think in the Augustinian way about the outside world, which they can experience. They think that this outside world, which they can experience as it presents itself to human beings, could not provide true certainty, that nothing can be gained from it on which one might base oneself as a fixed point in a philosophy of life. But with regard to the things which people experience inwardly, irrespective of how they do so, being with them directly, it is the individual himself who lives in the ideas, the feelings inside him. One knows that one is right within one's inner life. For a thinker like Augustine, the fact, inwardly experienced, is that with regard to anything human beings inwardly experience as truth, they can be under no delusion. You may think that everything else which the world says may be deceptive, but there can be absolutely no doubt that the ideas, the feelings that live in us, are really and truly experienced by us in our inner life. This solid basis for accepting one truth about which there can be no doubt was one of the starting points in Augustine's philosophy of life. In the 5th post-Atlantean era, this point was taken up in a most striking way by Descartes, who lived from 1596 to 1650, already in the dawn, therefore, of the 5th post-Atlantean era. For Descartes, too, saw this element which remains, when all else is in doubt, as the starting point, and he put it in the well-known words, "I think, therefore I am." And he was really wholly in accord with Augustine in taking this view. Now, the situation is that when it comes to one's philosophy of life, one always has to say, quote, someone who is in the stream of human evolution at some point in time will have certain views. There will be certain aspects of his views of which he is not aware. People who come later will see them. Close quote. We might say that those who come later are privileged to see something in a fuller and truer sense than someone who has to say certain things at a particular time in human evolution. This is a fact that cannot be denied. And it is good, as I have mentioned on previous occasions, if people who are taking our anthroposophical point of view will consciously and thoroughly realize the following. The knowledge of spiritual things one is able to gain at the present time, however distinctive it may be, must not be taken as a sum of absolute dogmas. It has to be clearly understood that there will be others at a later time who will see a greater truth in such things as we are able to present today than we are able to see for ourselves. This is indeed the basis for humanity's cultural evolution. And any obstacle to all inhibition of cultural advance ultimately depends on people not being prepared to admit that they would really like to be given truths that are not the truths of a particular era, but are absolute, timeless dogmas. Today, in particular, we are able to look back from our point of view on Augustine, and we'll have to say to ourselves, quote, if one takes the Augustinian point of view, one will have to be very clear in one's mind that he assumed uncertainty as to the truth in all external revelations, but genuine truth in experiencing the things that live in our soul. Close quote. It calls for a degree of courage for someone to take this point of view. Perhaps one would not need to speak of this in the decided fashion in which I have to do it, if it were not the case that exactly in our time, courage would characteristically be lacking when it comes to philosophies of life. This courage to which I am referring shows itself in two directions. One is that, like Augustine, you boldly admit, quote, you will have genuine certainty only with regard to anything you experience inwardly. Close quote. Then there has to be the other pole of this courage, and at the present time this is indeed lacking. One must then also have the courage to admit to oneself, quote, the revelation of external things through the senses does not have this genuine certainty of their being real. Close quote. It does need inner courage in our thinking to say that there is no genuine certainty about external reality, which is considered to be absolutely certain in modern materialism. On the other hand, it needs a degree of courage to say to oneself, quote, genuine certainty comes only if one is really aware of one's inner experiences. Close quote. Yes, even in our day, this has been said again, and there are people who ask others, people who want to develop a philosophy of life, to have this courage, which shows itself in two ways. Yet we have to think differently about this today, if we really want to get to the bottom of things. And there we see the whole historical position held by Augustine for the people of today, and that our thinking about the matter has to be somewhat different. For today we have to know something which Augustine or Descartes did not consider. I have discussed this in the part of my book titled The Riddle of Man, where I was referring to Descartes. Today we have to say, quote, the idea that one might arrive at a satisfactory philosophy of life by grasping the direct inner life of man, the way people experience it today, this idea is refuted every time we go to sleep. Close quote. Every time someone falls back into the unconscious state of sleep in our day, he or she will be deprived not of the absolute true certainty of inner experience of which Augustine spoke, but of the reality of this inner experience. The reality of this genuine experience is always lost from going to sleep to waking up again. Today human beings experience the inner life in a slightly different way from the way people did as late as the fourth post-Atlantean era, and even in the evening twilight of Augustine's day. Today they have to say, quote, however clearly, however exactly a certainty may be inwardly experienced, it still offers no certainty for life after death, for the simple reason that we see reality sink down into the unconscious sphere every time we sleep. And the people of today do not know if it does not also sink down into unreality. Close quote. So today we may no longer conclude that things inwardly experienced in seemingly absolute certainty cannot be called in question. In theory, none of it can be called in question, but the fact of sleep goes against this. Turning our attention to what has just been said, we will immediately see how Augustine was able to arrive at this view, and did so with much greater justification than Descartes later on, who really was more or less only repeating Augustine's statement. Some late echoes of the old atavistic clairvoyance still existed for the whole fourth post-Atlantean era, including the time when Augustine lived. Sadly, far too little of this is taken note of in history today, and little is known of it. But throughout the whole of the fourth post-Atlantean era, very many people knew from personal experience that there is a spiritual life, for they saw it in their visions. But during that fourth era, they mostly saw it because it entered into their sleep life, and that was different from the way it was in the second and third eras. We may therefore say that in the fourth post-Atlantean era, it was different from the way it is now, in the fifth era, when sleep means being wholly unconscious. In the fourth post-Atlantean era, people still knew that from going to sleep until waking up was a time when the ideas and feelings they had in their waking hours acted in other forms. The waking life of truth went down, as it were, into the dim conscious awareness of sleep life. And they knew that the inner truth they experienced held not only truth but also reality. For they knew moments in the life of sleep when the things one learns in the inner life were present as real and not merely abstract life. It is immaterial if someone may be able to demonstrate even today that Augustine would have been able to say from personal experience, quote, "I know that the things we experience inwardly as true but unreal exist for the time from going to sleep to waking up." Close quote. But it was certainly possible in Augustine's day to gain such a view and base oneself on it. If you now extend what I have been saying with regard to the subjective human principle and generalize it for the whole macrocosm, this will take you to something different. You then discover the element from which this subjective principle actually arose in earlier times, namely in the fourth post-Atlantean era, and what has made it possible. In pre-Christian times, the mystery of Golgotha marks the boundary between the ancient atavistic views and later new ones, which are still evolving today. People were still able to adhere to certain living mystery truths. The truths from the mysteries which I mean here are truths relating to the great secret of birth and death. Some initiates considered the secret of birth and of death to be a secret which should not be made known to the world, because the world was not yet ripe for it. But within the mysteries, some view was also held in pre-Christian times on the connection between birth and death in the macrocosm, man being part of this in the whole of his essential nature. During that time before Christ, it was through the mysteries that attention was above all directed toward birth, toward all that was being born in the world. Anyone familiar with the old philosophies of life will know that the emphasis was on being born, on coming into existence, shooting and sprouting. And I have, of course, made it clear on several occasions that the opposite came with the mystery on Golgotha. I used the following words, quote, "Consider that about 600 years before Golgotha, Buddha, who in human evolution represents something like the ending of the pre-Christian philosophy of life, did, among other things, develop his views on seeing a corpse. Death is suffering, and it was like an axiom for Buddha that suffering must be overcome. The means had to be found to enable one to turn away from death. It was the corpse from which the Buddha turned away to arrive at something which, albeit spiritualized, was to him, nevertheless, something in which one can get a sense of shooting, sprouting life." Looking at life in other regions 600 years after the mystery on Golgotha, we see that seeing the dead body of the Christ on the cross was not something people would turn away from, but something they would turn toward, something they would look upon with all their heart, as the symbol that would solve the riddle of the macrocosm, insofar as it related to the human being and his growth and development. This is a very special relationship within those 12 centuries. 600 years before the mystery on Golgotha, turning away from a corpse, led to something that was to be an elevating principle in the philosophy of life. 600 years after the mystery on Golgotha, the symbol of the cross had evolved, a turning toward death, toward the dead body, to find there the strength to arrive at a philosophy of life that would cast a light also on the progress of man. Among the many things which characterize the tremendous change that came with the mystery on Golgotha is this Buddha symbol of turning away from the dead body, and the Christ symbol of turning toward the dead body, which is seen as the dead body of the most sublime spirit ever to have appeared on earth. It truly was the case that in a certain respect the old mysteries placed the riddle of births at the center of philosophies of life. In doing so, the mysteries, which sought to convey mystery knowledge and not just superficial views, did at the same time present the human soul with a profound cosmological secret. They directed attention to the principle connected with the life of births in world evolution. And you will not be able to understand the life of births in world evolution unless you go back to the ancient riddle of the moon. We know, of course, that before the earth came to be earth, it was embodied as the old moon. Various phenomena connected with our present moon, the late descendant of the old moon, you can read it up in my title, Occult Science and Outline, Reader's Aside, also known as An Outline of Esoteric Science, and a Reader's Aside, have to be seen as late echoes of events that happened in the time of the old moon, a time which preceded Earth evolution. There would be no births, none in all the realms of nature in Earth evolution, if the laws of the old moon did not apply, or rather those of its late descendant, which is the Earth's satellite. Every birthing in all the realms of nature and in humanity is connected with the moon's activities. And it was in connection with this that the ancient Hebrew initiates considered Yahweh to be a moon god. Yahweh is the God who controls all bringing forth. It was understood that cosmologically, the laws of the moon governed all bringing forth processes in all realms of nature. They were thus able to speak of a profound secret in cosmology, symbolically as it were, saying, quote, "As the light of the moon shines on the earth, all shooting, sprouting life, all births come from the principle represented by the moonlight." Close quote. In the highest mysteries of pre-Christian times, people did not turn to the light of the sun, but to the sun's life as it was reflected by the moon when speaking of the secret of births. The particular nuance given to pre-Christian philosophies of life in their depths had arisen because in the old mysteries people knew the secret of the moon. The light of the sun was considered to be something veiled, something not very good for people, unless they were well prepared. For it was known that it is delusion, Maya, to think that the sun ray coming to earth called forth the shooting, sprouting life forms in the different realms of nature. It was known that getting born did not depend on the life of the sun, but rather the other way round. Being scorched, the diminishing of life did so. The mystery secret was that the moon lets life forms be born, and the sun lets them die. However much people were venerating the life of the sun for other reasons in the pre-Christian mysteries of old, they venerated it as the ground and origin of death. The fact that life forms must die cannot be ascribed to the sun, which we know from title Occult Science to have been the second embodiment of the earth, but we can ascribe it to the present sun, which we see on the horizon in all its glory. Well, now, the end of life, which is the opposite of those births, is connected with the life of the sun. But there is also something else, something that was not so important in pre-Christian times, but has become particularly important in post-Christian times. All conscious life is connected with the life of the sun. And the conscious life which human beings go through in a life on earth, that conscious awareness which shines out particularly in the fifth post-Atlantean era, which is our own, is intensively connected with the life of the sun. We merely need to consider this life of the sun from the spiritual point of view, just as we have been doing in the lectures given earlier this summer. Yes, the sun is the creator of death, the scorching life in the cosmos, and also for human beings. But it is at the same time also the creator of conscious life. This conscious life was not so important in pre-Christian times because they still had the atavistic life in clairvoyance inherited from the old moon. Conscious awareness has become important in post-Christian times, more important than life itself. For the goal of Earth evolution can only be achieved if this conscious awareness is gained in an appropriate way. Human beings have to accept this conscious awareness from the one who gives us not only this, but also the life of death, not the life of births. It is with this that through the mystery on Golgotha, the Son of the Sun, the S-O-N of the S-U-N, the Christ entered into earth evolution, going through the living body of Jesus of Nazareth, the power, as it were, which has become the most important principle in earth evolution. This is connected with profound cosmic secrets. Quote, "From your sleep life," the initiates of the old mysteries would say to their disciples, "a sleep life into which the powers of the moon enter even when you are awake." We know, of course, that human beings are partly asleep even in their waking hours. The life of the moon tinges this life of sleep, just as the silver sickle of the moon tinges the darkness of night. Close quote. Christian initiates have to say to their disciples, quote, "Seek to understand that conscious awareness shines out from waking life, because the powers of the sun enter into it, just as the sun shines on all life on earth from morning to night." Close quote. The change came with the mystery on Golgotha. In pre-Christian times it was most important to perceive the origin of life. Now it has become most important to perceive the source and origin of conscious awareness. It is only by knowing how to connect the cosmological truth to which I've been referring with the true certainty that lives in our souls, that is only by grasping spiritual science inwardly, that we will be assured of the reality of the Spirit within the principle which otherwise does not assure reality in this inner life. We cannot get far with the means available to Augustine, the means available to those who base themselves on Augustinian principles. Every sleep confutes the genuine certainty of our inner experiences. It will only be when, in addition to these inner experiences, we come to experience their reality, that we can gain a genuine, firm foothold on the soil of these inner experiences. Anything we think, anything we feel in our present life on earth is not real in this present life on earth. Even today there are some scientific thinkers who acknowledge this. It is unreal for the present time. The strange thing is that our most intimate experience, where the truth shines out for us beyond all doubt, is not real in the present time, but it is the actual perpetuating seed for our next life on earth. We may speak of this principle, of which Augustine spoke, and for which, in his case, there was no guarantee, as the seed for our next life on earth. We may say, quote, "It is definitely true that the truth shines out within us, but does so as something which is not real. Today it is still unreal, but in our next life on earth, this unreal principle, which is seed in its unreality, will be fruit, a fruit which will bring the next life to life, just as this year's seed in a plant will bring the visible plant to life next year." Close quote. We have to overcome time. Only then will we find reality in the things we are able to experience inwardly. We would never be the human beings we are meant to be if at the present time the inwardly experienced truth did have the same reality as the outside world. We would never be able to be free. Freedom would be completely out of the question, nor would we be individuals. We'd be part of the natural order. Anything happening within us would happen of necessity. We only are individuals, and indeed free individuals, because on the billows of necessary developments there arises, like a miracle, the unreality of our inner experiences, something which will only be outward reality of the kind we see in the world around us in our next life on earth. That is the deceptive quality of time, something which still lives in people's fantasies today. People do not consider that anything which inwardly shines out as unreal in one life on earth will be real in the next. Now, this is something we'll be considering further tomorrow and the day after. We see how, from the point of view we are able to gain today, we can survey Augustine's point of view and see something in his way of looking at things, as it were, which he himself was not yet able to see. Thus, Augustine is perhaps especially significant for us as someone in the evening twilight of the fourth post-Atlantean era, because he was, with particular precision, pointing to the ideal, conceptual stream in world events, seeking to find a fixed point in that ideal stream in world events. That is what Augustine tried to do. All we want to do today is to state this historical fact. In his time, people had not yet understood that a tremendous change had come with regard to the mystery on Golgotha and to death. For it is only from this mystery of death that the true consolidation of the absolute certainty of the truths experienced within the human soul can then well forth. We'll now take a big leap and characterize another individual, just as we have been talking about the characteristics of Augustine during the evening twilight of the fourth post-Atlantean era. We're going to consider characteristic individuals of the fifth post-Atlantean era in a particular respect. I'll select two of them. One of them, and beginning with him, we can characterize what emerged for humanity in the fifth post-Atlantean era, in one particular respect, was Henri de Saint-Simon, who lived from 1760 to 1825. The other, a follower of Saint-Simon, was Auguste Comte, who lived from 1798 to 1857. Augustine was someone who made every effort, using all means his insights had provided, to consolidate Christianity. Both Saint-Simon and Auguste Comte had grown utterly confused about Christianity. It will be easiest for us to get an idea of the thinking of Auguste Comte, and in a sense also of Saint-Simon, by considering some of Auguste Comte's main ideas, at least in a schematic way. Auguste Comte was very much a representative for a particular kind of philosophy of life. And it was only because people were not much concerned about the way in which the different philosophies fit into people's way of life that someone like Auguste Comte was studied as a rarity in history. What people don't know is that basically, though perhaps not everywhere, people have been influenced by, in a way, been pupils of Auguste Comte, though this is not what matters. Deep down in their thinking, they are of the same mind as Auguste Comte. So we are able to say that Auguste Comte is representative of a major part of people's approach to life in the present time. Auguste Comte said, quote, "Humanity has evolved. It has evolved in 3 stages and has now reached the 3rd stage. If we observe people's inner lives through these 3 stages, we find that at the 1st stage people's ideas inclined mainly toward demonology." Close quote. This means that the 1st stage of evolution in the Comtean sense would be demonological. Quote, "People imagined that spirits were active, taking effect behind the natural phenomena which are perceived through the senses." Close quote. You have to think of them the way people always imagine spirits to be in ordinary life. Demons are suspected to be everywhere, big ones and small ones. That was the first stage. Then, having developed a bit further, people began to move from the demonological view to a metaphysical one. Where they had originally imagined demons, elemental spirits, or the like behind all phenomena, they now thought of understandable reasons put in abstract terms. People turned metaphysical when they did no longer want to believe in demons. The second stage was therefore metaphysics. Certain concepts were thought up and connected with one's own life, and people thought that they would get to the ground and origin of things with such concepts. Humanity has now also gone beyond this stage and entered into the third stage. Auguste Comte assumed, and this was very much in line with the thinking of his teacher Saint Simon, that wanting to learn about the ground and origin of the world, people no longer look to the demons, nor to metaphysical concepts, but merely to the sense-perceptible reality provided by positivist science. The third age is thus one of positivist science. People are meant to consider the things revealed to them in external scientific discoveries as enlightening and leading to a philosophy of life. They were to seek enlightenment about themselves in the same way in which mathematical enlightenment casts light on dimensions in space, physics on systems of forces, chemistry on the structure of matter, biology on the systems of life. In his great work on positive philosophy, Auguste Comte sought to give a complete picture of the harmony of everything which the different sciences can tell us, saying that this alone was worthy of man in his third stage of development. He did consider Christianity, saying it was the most sublime development, but nevertheless only as the final phase in demonology. Metaphysics followed. They provided a sum of abstract concepts. But according to Auguste Comte, only positive science arrives at something that is truly real, also offering an existence worthy of humanity. He, therefore, wanted to establish a church based on positivist science, to organize people in social systems which were based on that positivist science. Auguste Comte did in the end arrive at some very strange ideas. I'll just take some characteristic elements today. He spoke a lot about establishing a positivist church. This positivist church, if you study this you will get to know the man's thinking, was also meant to introduce a kind of calendar. There were to be a great number of anniversaries dedicated to such figures as Newton or Galileo as representatives of positivist sciences. Those days of the year were to be devoted to the veneration of the individuals concerned. Other days were to be given to calumniating individuals, such as Julius the Apostate or Napoleon. This, too, was to be regulated. Life in general was to be largely regulated according to the principles of positivist science. If you know life, you'll know that not many people want to put the ideals of Auguste Comte into practice, but that is sheer cowardice, for in truth people do think the way Auguste Comte did. If you study the image presented by his positivist church, you will certainly gain the impression that the structure of that church is exactly the same as that of the Roman Catholic Church, although Auguste Comte's positivist church lacks the Christ. And this is what is so strange. We have to consider it utterly characteristic that Auguste Comte was looking for a Roman Catholic Church without Christianity. He arrived at this by letting the three stages, demonic, metaphysical, and positivist, enter into his soul. We might say that he considered all the trappings of Christianity that evolved in the course of history up to his time as something that was very good, but he wanted to remove the Christ himself from that church of his. Basically, that is the essence of Auguste Comte, a Roman Catholic Church without the Christ. This is highly characteristic for the dawn of the fifth post-Atlantean era. Someone who had taken up Romanism was thinking in a Romanist way, and at the same time was entirely thinking in the way of the fifth post-Atlantean era, with its anti-spiritual character, had to think the way Auguste Comte did. Auguste Comte and his teacher Saint Simon are therefore absolutely characteristic of the dawn of the fifth post-Atlantean age. But much would be decided in this fifth post-Atlantean era, and therefore the other nuances which are also possible also came up. As I said, I want to give you some glimpses of history today. We'll then develop things on that basis. Schelling, who lived from 1775 to 1854, is in remarkable contrast to Auguste Comte. He is equally characteristic, as it were, of the dawn of the fifth post-Atlantean era. Today I cannot even schematically go into Schelling's philosophy, highly differentiated in itself, of course. But I'd like to refer to a few things that are characteristic. I said that in the evening twilight of the fourth post-Atlantean era, Augustine's position was to consider the one stream, the ideal one, in such a way that a fixed point might arise from it where he might take his position. We now enter into the fifth post-Atlantean era. In its dawn, we have figures like Saint Simon and Auguste Comte, who were looking for the firm base in the other, the purely natural, material order of positivist sciences. This gives us the two directions, Augustine on the one hand, Auguste Comte on the other. Schelling used the means available in the fifth post-Atlantean era to look behind the things one is able to see in the world, for a bridge between the ideal and the real, the ideal and the material. You'll find the main points in my book titled The Riddle of Man. He showed tremendous energy in looking for a way of reconciling these opposites. Initially, he only developed abstract ideas. By starting from the same base as Johann Gottlieb Fichte, he made some progress and tried to come to something in the world that was ideal and real at one and the same time. There followed a time in Schelling's life when he felt it was impossible to arrive at such a bridge using the means of abstraction which had evolved in the course of time in that era. It seemed to him that this was impossible. One day he said to himself, quote, "People really have only gained these concepts for understanding the natural order outside on the basis of modern scholarship. But we have no concepts for anything which is behind this outer natural order, the sphere where a bridge can be built between the ideal and the real." Close quote. And it is most interesting that one day Schelling admitted that it seemed to him that the academics of recent centuries had come to a secret agreement, that they would exclude anything deeper from their philosophy of life, anything that would lead to true and genuine life. One would therefore have to go to the non-academic people. This was also the time when Schelling considered the works of Jakob Böhme. There he found the spiritual deepening which led to the last, the theosophical period in his life, from which has come the beautiful work on human freedom, the beautiful work on the gods of Samothrace, on the Kabiri, then his title Philosophy of Mythologies, and title Philosophy of Revelation. Schelling was seeking, especially during this last part of his life, to understand what influence the mystery on Golgotha had had on human history. This was what he wanted to know above all else. And he came to realize that the concepts available to the scholars of his day would not enable people to understand the life where the mystery on Golgotha was flowing, and therefore also not the true life of man. Schelling, and that is the trait which I want to draw special attention to, we'll make this the basis for further study in the days ahead, arrived at a view that was the absolute opposite of the view held by his contemporary, Auguste Comte. And this is the strange thing. We are able to say that Auguste Comte was looking for a Catholicism, or rather a Roman Catholic Church, that was without Christianity. Schelling was looking, from his point of view, for a Christianity without a church. A Christianity without a church. Schelling was, as it were, seeking to Christianize the whole of modern life, make it wholly Christian, so that everything human beings are able to think, feel, and do would have the Christ impulse pulsing through it. What he was not looking for was a separate religious life for Christianity, especially not on the pattern that already existed in historical evolution, though he did take a careful look at this life. We thus have the two extremes, Auguste Comte's idea of a church without the Christ, and Schelling's idea of the Christ without a church. I wanted to speak to you about these two historical views, so that we may make this our basis. We see one individual, Augustine, seeking a firm base in idealism. Another individual, Auguste Comte, who was looking for this in realism. And Schelling, who wanted to build a bridge. All these were tendencies that preceded the evolution in which we now find ourselves. What we can say is that one can survey what happened through many centuries, what went on where philosophies of life are concerned, and one can then turn one's attention to the way in which people's ideas evolved in a wider context. Study of Auguste Comte yields a most important aperçu, but Auguste Comte was not able to grasp it in its pure form, being wholly caught up in his prejudices. However, we get something that will be an important starting point for us in the next few days if we consider the whole situation. I'd say Augustine, Auguste Comte, Schelling. I want to come to this aperçu when we conclude today's reflections, for I would wish you to have it in mind. In the next few days we'll then speak of something which is connected with this aperçu in a most significant way. As it has arisen from the subject matter I have been presenting, I will give it to you in aphoristic form, without being able to go into reasons why this aperçu has come up not with Auguste Comte, but with others when one takes the standpoint of a later time, as I put it today, and takes a point of view which is much later, the standpoint of someone who at the beginning of the 20th century thinks about someone who was a thinker at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. But it really is important. I have stressed this many times over and also brought out clearly this time that today we look at philosophies of life not just in abstract terms and on their own, but in the way in which they are part of the whole life of humanity. This is the only way of coming to a standpoint of reality. We have to consider how it fits into the whole life of humanity. Saint-Simon and Auguste Comte clearly understood that they were only able to arrive at their positivism in modern times. That positivism would have been impossible at an earlier time. Auguste Comte in particular was very much aware, quote, "The way I am thinking," close quote, he more or less said to himself, continue quote, "is a way which is only possible in our time," close quote. This is tremendously important in the modern movement and is indeed connected with the aperçu to which I was referring. If one makes the point which Auguste Comte considered to be the starting point for his threefold system, one can say, in his sense, that this threesome is theology, metaphysics, and positivist science, as he called it, parenthesis, rightly or wrongly so, that does not matter, parenthesis. The strange thing is that we are able to ask, quote, who is most liable to be a believer where one of these directions is concerned, close quote. Please, do not misunderstand me with regard to what I am now going to say with reference to the aperçu, and do not take it as a one-sided dogma, nor to take it as it might be crudely observed with absolute certainty. Readers aside, the word aperçu, which I believe I'm spelling correctly, I don't actually know the meaning of it at the moment, but it's spelled A-P-E-R-C with a little mark under it, U. A-P-E-R-C-U, aperçu. My apologies, end of readers aside. No, we have to consider the whole course of human evolution if we want to turn our attention to the words I am now going to say. But in that case we cannot ask, quote, who'll be the believer, close quote, but, quote, who'll be most likely to be a believer in one of these directions, close quote. Careful observation will then show, however much the facts would seem to contradict this, that the one most likely to be a believer in theology, not a representative of theology, but a believer, I am not talking about religion, but about theology, is the soldier. Civil servants, especially in the legal field, are most likely to believe in metaphysics, and industrialists will most easily come to believe in positivist sciences. When one wants to judge life, it is most important not to be abstract, but to look at life in a truly unbiased way. But one then has to raise questions like these. Coming to a conclusion today, I want you to treat this as an aperçu, something which comes to mind when one enters more intimately into Auguste Comte's thinking. He was aware that he could only be fully understood by industrialists, and could really only come up with his views in an industrial age. This is connected with the fact that an industrialist will most easily believe in positivist science, a soldier in not just the Christian but any theology, and the civil servant in metaphysics. Full insight into the situations we are currently considering will not be possible unless we take a closer look at the nature of the human being between going to sleep and waking up again, that is, in the sleep state. You are all familiar with this sleep state in theory. The principle, which we call capital I and astral body, if names are to be used, separates from the physical body and the ether body. Yet, if we want to take a closer look at the nature of sleep, we have to be aware that it is actually in the sleep state that human beings experience the reality of which we spoke yesterday. I said that Augustine sought to grasp true and real certainty about the world in inner experience. But human beings do not fully grasp their inner life when they are in the waking state. It has to be understood that the principle known as I and as astral body does not really come to conscious awareness in the waking state. Only an image, a mirror image of I and astral body, comes to conscious awareness in this waking state. If human beings were aware of themselves when in the sleep state, that is, from going to sleep to waking up, or we might also say if they grew aware of themselves by doing the exercises which are described in my published works, they would, in being aware of their experiences during sleep, gain living experience of the true form, as it were, of I and astral body, and not of the mirror image they have in the waking state. It has to be understood that this true form of I and astral body appears before the soul, before conscious awareness, in images, in such a way that in their sleep human beings truly experience inwardly, in their inner life, within their I and their astral body, something which we call the third hierarchy, the hierarchy of angels, archangels, and archai. In their waking state, human beings are not aware of this intimate connection with the spirits called angels, archangels, and archai, and a connection which continues for the whole of their lives. This is the delusion under which they are in their waking state, that their experience is limited to the abstract I and the shadowy ideas and thoughts that fill the human soul, for they are indeed shadowy, or indeed the dreamlike sense of wanting to do things. The whole point is that in their waking life, human beings have to remain limited to this shadow nature of their I and their astral body, and that they cannot be conscious of the fact that the spirits of the third hierarchy are having an influence on their I. At the very moment when human beings are actually waking up in sleep, if I may put it like this, they would not have an outside natural world around them, but would have an inner sense of those spirits, angels, archangels, and the spirits of the age. It is because of this that we have something in the state of our soul which we would not otherwise have. If the hierarchy of the angels did not influence our astral body, we would not be able to see ourselves as individuals. It is because the hierarchy of the angels influences our spirit and soul that we feel ourselves to be independent individuals. Thanks to the influence of the hierarchy of the archangels, we feel ourselves to be part of the whole of humanity. We may also say that we feel ourselves to be human because the archangels shine into our existence in spirit and soul, inspiring it. And because the archai, the spirits of the age, send their pulses into our true nature, intuiting it, we feel ourselves to be creatures on earth. That is, not just part of present-day humanity, but part of the whole of earthly humanity, from the beginnings of earth evolution to its end. So this is why we feel ourselves to be part of the whole of earth evolution. We sense it only dimly, for we only have a dim inner sense of the spirits of the age. We cannot say that we see ourselves as an individual. This we can only do when we achieve awareness in images. This awareness in images continues to be a kind of mirror image for as long as we only experience our thoughts in such a way that we feel ourselves to be individuals through our independent life of thought. Let us be clear once more as to what makes us feel that we are individuals. We do so in that we are able to join one thought arbitrarily to another. You would immediately cease to see yourself as an individual if you were forced to add one thought to another the way one natural phenomenon follows another. The experience of inner freedom, in taking our thoughts forward we feel ourselves to be individuals, is something which does come most clearly to conscious awareness when we are awake. It does so because from going to sleep to waking up, human beings are fully imbued with their angel, and this angelic spirit belongs to our I. It is with much greater indifference, much less strength and intensity, that we feel ourselves to be part of the whole of humanity, for we are naturally less close to the archangelic spirit, which makes us feel that we are human, than we are to our angel. And the principle which places us as individuals in the whole stream of human evolution does remain really, really shadowy. We try, of course, in working with spiritual science, to bring this feeling ourselves as part of the whole of earthly humanity awake. Realizing that in the fifth post-Atlantean era, human beings experience things in this way. In the fourth post-Atlantean era, they did so in another way. In the third post-Atlantean era, in yet another way. Through the science of the spirit, we now gain awareness of the way in which the state of the soul changes through the ages, under the influence of the different spirits of the age, the spirits from the hierarchy of the archai. And this awareness really makes it possible for human beings to see themselves in history, realizing, quote, I am an individual living in the 20th century. Close quote. Most people do not realize at all that their individual nature is only thinkable, can only be real, because it exists within a particular period of time. Our mind and spirit is wholly imbued with the spirits of the third hierarchy. This is something people would come to realize if they sought to develop insight in images in a more intensive way. As you will realize, this insight in images is not there in the ordinary run of human development. From going to sleep to waking up, the reality of I and astral body is dampened down. When awake, human beings lose the connection with the spirits of the third hierarchy. This is because, particularly in the present cycle of time, they are under an illusion, even when awake. As we have just seen, they are under the illusion in their sleep that their I and astral body are inactive. They are not inactive, They are in lively interaction with the spirits of the third hierarchy. In the waking state, the situation is that in the present cycle of time, our physical body and our ether body are, in a way, wrongfully absorbing our soul and spirit nature. They imbue themselves with it. The normal situation would be very different for human beings. It would be that in the waking state, human beings would feel themselves to be I and astral body, with the physical body and the ether body like a kind of peel or shell which they slip into, like something they carry about with them. But that is not how human beings feel themselves to be. They feel as if physical body and ether body were they, but they are not. We are indeed this entity in soul and spirit, which uses the physical and ether body like a tool. We are, however, unable to rise above this delusion. It is part of the influences which our cycle in time has. So, we have to feel identical with our physical body and ether body, though in the normal state of conscious awareness, this would be like a hammer we hold and use to strike. We have to give ourselves up to the delusion that it is we who move through space in the flesh. But it is not us. It is merely so because the conscious awareness is unlawfully absorbed by our physical body and our ether body. The reason for this is that the Ahrimanic powers are more powerful in the present cycle of time than they would have been if human evolution had taken its normal course. They draw the I and the astral body to the physical and ether body, as it were, creating the delusion for human beings that this head they have is they, that these hands and the whole body is they themselves. The physical body does unlawfully gain the conscious awareness which makes it seem as if our physical body brought about our individual nature. Someone who thinks that his physical body brings about his individual nature is under the same delusion as someone who stands in front of a mirror and thinks that the mirror is producing him, since it is reflecting his image to him. To say that a form made of flesh, which we carry about with us, is us, is no better than if someone holds out his hand in front of a mirror and thinks that the mirror is producing his hand for him. The whole of modern science makes people believe that the individual nature we experience inwardly has something to do with the physical body and the ether body, and not that the physical body and the ether body reflect this I and astral nature, creating the illusory image which from waking up to going to sleep we say is our I and our thoughts, that is our astral body. This, as it were, is the fundamental truth which we must perceive in the first place. With regard to this fundamental truth, people today are, out of the forces in our present cycle of time, giving themselves up to a delusion in the conscious mind, which is exactly what I have just been saying. We think that the thoughts or also feelings we experience inwardly come from our living body. But human beings are subject to this delusion by nature. In their present state of conscious awareness, they cannot escape this delusion. Just as the sun seems larger when it appears on the horizon than it does when it is up above, we know this to be an illusion, but that is how it appears, so it has to seem to us that it is in flesh and blood, as it were, that we see ourselves as individuals. The conscious mind is deceived. Human beings have not always been subject to this delusion. Essentially, it is a character trait of post-Christian times, after the mystery on Golgotha. Before the mystery on Golgotha, it was a different kind of illusion. People did then not think that their conscious awareness was bound up with the physical body. History does not refer to this, but it is so nevertheless. It would be nonsense to suggest that someone who lived in the 2nd or 3rd millennium before the Christian era thought his soul was somehow produced by the physical body. In earlier times, no one felt that his soul and spiritual nature was bound to the living body the way people do today. The people of those earlier times did, however, have a lively awareness of the spirits of the third hierarchy. This they did have. They knew, quote, "My soul is not identical with my body," close quote. This gave them a distinct awareness that the soul is not bound to the blood or to the muscles and so on, but that the soul is connected with the spirits of the third hierarchy. A different kind of illusion existed for them, not in the conscious mind, but with regard to life. They considered the soul with the spirits of the third hierarchy to be bound to the natural world outside, just as modern man believes his soul to be bound to his physical body. Modern man is under the delusion in his conscious mind that his soul is bound to his physical body and therefore does not see angels, archangels, and archai. His physical body obscures them for him. The human being of old, in spite of being distinctly aware of the presence of the spirits of the third hierarchy, of their being bound up with his soul, would see the sense-perceptible natural world only dimly, indirectly. Modern man thinks his soul depends on his body. The earlier human beings thought that the spirits of the third hierarchy were bound up with the natural world outside, a world they perceived only dimly. They would confuse divine spirits, the spirits of the third hierarchy, with natural phenomena, seeing them reflected in those natural phenomena. Modern man places his soul in flesh and blood. The people of those early times placed the spirits of the third hierarchy in the natural world outside. They did not have the natural science we have today, but believed natural phenomena to be brought about by one demon or another, by more or less divine spirits about which they were under a life delusion. They were under that delusion because, in their view, those spirits were active in the natural phenomena in an almost physical form. It is important to know that in human evolution there was this earlier, pre-Christian time when human beings were under the life illusion which I have characterized. After the mystery on Golgotha, people were under an illusion in the conscious mind. The influence of Christ Jesus, we'll speak of this tomorrow, should be to remove this mental delusion, at least in people's conscious minds, in a way similar to the way it was done for the life delusion in the ancient mysteries. With the, quote, "Christ in me," close quote, people should feel that the principle which is I and astral body lives in spiritual freedom and is not bound up with flesh and blood. They will, of course, only be able to perceive it through vision gained in spiritual science. But thanks to Paul's "not I, but the Christ in me," they can feel it. The things I have been saying will give you the reasons why human beings must, in a way, experience the duality of the natural order on the one hand. This has no ideals, linking one event with the next from sheer necessity, merely connecting cause with effect and effect with cause, so that it is never possible to think that moral or other kinds of ideals are connected with whatever happens in the natural world. On the other hand, one comes to realize that our existence would not be truly human without ideals, if we did not have something else to live with as human beings, something other than mere natural order. However, with the existing conscious awareness, we would not be able to see that our ideals can be as effective as electricity or magnetism or the power of heat, so that our ideals would actually influence the natural order. Because of this, the natural order and the ideal order are side by side for us, and we cannot bridge the gap between them. In our waking hours, the Ahrimanic free thinking is, quote, "As an individual person, I am not any more bound to my physical body and to my ether body than I am bound when I stand before a mirror, and the mirror reflects my image for me," close quote. If people's awareness of their I and astral body were like this, and if they would realize that this I and this astral body are something very real and not a mere mirror image, then they would also acknowledge on the basis of their ideals, quote, those are real powers, like electricity and magnetism, but they do not have an influence in the present time, but will gain effectiveness as we go from this present incarnation to the next, from this life on earth to the next. Close quote. If human beings were to realize, when in their waking state, that their I and their astral body are bound up with the spirits of the third hierarchy, or in other words, if they were able to know themselves fully as earthly human beings, not just feeling themselves to be an independent individual, if they could sense how they are wrong in feeling that they are human beings of flesh and blood, then they also would not think that the natural order which presents itself to their senses out there was indeed powerful enough to resist the power of their ideals. They would know that all matter disintegrates in the natural order of today, that there is no such thing as the conservation of matter, but that everything which is natural destroys itself. When today's nature does no longer exist, something else, outward, sense-perceptible, and real, will have taken its place. The ideals of today will be the natural world of times to come. We are therefore able to say, quote, we experience natural order today, there's a figure drawn, and ideal order, another figure, close quote. Physicists think that there is conservation of energy and of matter, that the natural order persists with the same atoms and the same forces taking effect in future. If they are honest, all they can say is, quote, the ideal order has been a dream. It must drop away and vanish like the dream itself, so that in the earth's end state the ideal dream will no longer be there, will have been buried, close quote. Through natural science we see that this is an untruth, an illusion. We do have the natural order, but there is no conservation of energy and of matter. The natural order comes to an end at a certain point, and today's ideal order will then be the continuation of it. None of the things that are around our eyes today, around our ears, around all our senses, will exist when the earth has reached the Venus stage. I have spoken of this before. Within that nothingness, the possibility will arise for the ideals of present-day humanity to be outer reality. No philosophy of life which fails to recognize that the sense-perceptible world will perish can have any hope whatsoever that the ideal principle has the power to come to realization. If the sense-perceptible world were eternal, if there were such a thing as conservation of energy and of matter, the ideal world would be nothing but a dream. It is of tremendous importance that humanity needs to be enlightened in our day, and know that the ideas of the present time will be the natural world of the future. And that it is a tremendous illusion to think that atoms and physical forces go on forever. They are not eternal. They are temporal. It is a fatal aspect of spiritual science that one has to contradict a view which is considered to be the most certain of all in the established science of today, when in fact it is nothing but an Ahrimanic deception. Let us consider once more what I have just been saying. Before the mystery on Golgotha, human illusion was an illusion in life. After the mystery on Golgotha, it became what we may call an illusion in the conscious mind. If we know this, we understand many things in human evolution. Above all, we understand why human beings who, before the mystery on Golgotha, had atavistic clairvoyance, nevertheless did not see the things which they did see in their true form, but saw the spirits of the higher hierarchies as demons. This is why the old mythologies are largely demonologies. All the gods in the ancient mythologies are demons. This was so because there was this illusion in life, and human beings did, in a way, have to think of a kind of false natural order as the divine order, just as today they have to think of a false bodily order as humanity's order. There followed the mystery on Golgotha. Human beings had to take their state of soul to the point, as it were, where they perceived what had resulted from the mystery on Golgotha. The human soul related more directly in its waking state to the spirits of the higher hierarchies than it does today, when the conscious mind is deceived. People would see the spirits of the higher hierarchies, merely recasting them because of the life delusion into Zeus, Apollo, and so on. Those were spirits of the third hierarchy, but they had been recast, seen under the influence of the life delusion, just as today we see everything relating to man under the influence of the conscious mind's delusion. Yet with all this, a divine world order extended into humanity. Just consider how close people of past ages knew their human world to be to the divine world order. There you'd have the human hierarchy, and then there would be the divine hierarchy. People did not feel as closed off above as we do today. Their world ran on toward that of the gods. Think how close a Greek would feel his world of gods to be to the human world, the human hierarchy. There followed the mystery on Golgotha. There it was no longer the case. It was not the mystery on Golgotha, which was to provide a replacement for what had been lost, but it was time which brought it about that human beings were cut off, in their evolution, from that conscious connection with the divine and spiritual world of the third hierarchy. A memory remained, however, an historical memory. Then came the time after the mystery on Golgotha. People had to think in a somewhat different way than they had done before the mystery on Golgotha, but some of the immediate past still had an influence. In the immediate past, human beings knew that the divine spirits had influenced events on earth, putting human activities on earth in order. Because of this, people of old were convinced when they established states. The term state does not quite meet the case, but people are used to putting it this way. When the people of old created social structures, founded them, I'd say, they would know that these social structures were being established under the influence of the third hierarchy. People felt that their institutions on earth were institutions of the gods. You need only study the history of ancient Egypt, with no need for clairvoyance, and you'll find that the Egyptians were wholly convinced that everything human beings did in their social situations on earth was instituted by the spirits of the third hierarchy. This is how it was before the mystery on Golgotha. Only a memory of this remained after the mystery on Golgotha. What was the consequence of this? Well, you know that the church gradually established itself after the mystery on Golgotha. The church established a particular ranking order, deacons, archdeacons, bishops, archbishops, and so on. There was a quite specific idea behind this, which is still quite evident in the works of the early church writers. Read Dionysius the Areopagite, and you'll see it quite clearly. The administration of the church was to reflect the divine order. The way a deacon related to the archdeacon was to reflect the relationship of angel to archangel, and then again the relationship of archdeacon to bishop, a reflection of archangel to archai. The social structure of the church was intended to reflect the theocracy. Up in the spiritual world were the ranks of the hierarchies. Below, reflecting the spiritual hierarchies, the ranks of church dignitaries. The thinking behind this was not of the legal kind in the early days, after the mystery on Golgotha. It was theocratic. The church's hierarchy was seen as a reflection of the divine and spiritual hierarchies. This was the thinking in the early Christian centuries on earth, intending to cultivate institutions on earth where the relative positions of human beings reflected the image of the hierarchies up above in the spiritual world. People then gradually lost the awareness that had remained as a memory, an historical memory from the times of the old theocracy, when they had still known that earthly institutions were in fact a consequence of things done by the gods. Abstract concepts took the place of the living world of gods, which people had seen in the past and later on remembered. Instead of knowing that there is a world of divine, individual spirits up there, people then had abstract metaphysical concepts. There followed centuries when abstract ideas, metaphysics, took the place of the individual gods. Christians would call them angels. The divine order, which was to be reflected in the human order, had provided a theocratic element. The application of mere concepts to the order of human society provided something which, could only serve to maintain order in human social relationships. Where before thought was given to creating an image of the divine world in the way human society was structured, the only aim in the metaphysical age was to maintain order, punish evildoers, neither punish nor reward the good, establishing the kind of order needed to maintain the social order. When abstract metaphysical concepts had replaced the living gods, it was merely a matter of creating a human order in which people were labeled, making one the superior of the other, not because being superior was meant to reflect the relationship of an archangel to an angel, but because order was only considered possible if one person commanded and the other obeyed. Abstraction took the place of a social order that had been full of life. Essentially, this was the time of real metaphysics throughout the Middle Ages. It was the Roman mentality which essentially provided the elements for this metaphysical order, which then spread everywhere. The German word Fürst remains to remind us of the theocratic order. The first, because someone has to be the first, just as one is the first also in the divine hierarchy. A reminder of the merely metaphysical kind of order, the order of officialdom, administrators, is the German word Graf, which is connected with grafo, to write. The metaphysical order involves registration, maintaining order, producing documents, making contracts. Then came the more recent times. They brought disbelief in those abstract concepts, disbelief in metaphysics. People were only able to believe in anything evident to the senses, even in human life. Awareness of the traditions which had still persisted in earlier times, when traditions were living awareness of the fact that something or other was at work in social structures. Originally people thought of gods, later of metaphysical concepts. Such living awareness no longer existed in more recent times. It has to be regained in the ways indicated through spiritual science. But the industrial age brought the total eradication of all awareness of the spiritual background to the social structure. This is why Auguste Comte and Saint-Simon felt particularly connected with the industrial age, seeing that they were prepared only to accept positivist science, that is, anything connected with external, sense-perceptible natural order of causal necessity. The concept of truth has changed completely as a result. Modern people are not yet truly sentient of the fact that the concept of truth has a history. People have no real idea of this today. People who still know themselves to be in a theocratic order did not see truth the way people do today on the authority of natural science. It is extraordinarily difficult to speak about these things. Today, one thinks that with regard to the world order, truth means that an idea is in accord with an external reality. This is because of natural science. They did not see truth like this in the early Christian centuries. Their idea of truth was different, and this other meaning of truth was largely connected with the theocratic social order. They truly did not have the idea of truth which lives in all human souls today. People failed to realize this extraordinarily important fact. It will be much easier for us to grasp the idea of truth which people then had if we connected with the idea of the ordeal. Footnote, historically an ancient test of guilt or innocence by subjecting the accused to severe pain, survival of which was taken as divine proof of innocence. The German term for this translates as divine judgment. Footnote, end of footnote, by translator. When two people enter into single combat, we need not concern ourselves with the view taken of a duel today. I'm merely giving it as an example. It cannot be decided beforehand if A will win or B. Otherwise, they'd hardly start their duel. No, the truth only emerges as the event proceeds. We still have this idea of truth today when a war is fought. People would not go to war if everything was known beforehand, as it is when an experiment is done in a laboratory, where every aspect has been considered beforehand and one knows what the result will be. People would hardly go to war if they knew the outcome in advance, as one does with a laboratory experiment. There we still have the old idea of truth, which was that the truth will only be apparent in the process, and all one can do is watch and see what the result of the ordeal will be. That was the old idea of truth. People like Auguste Comte, or today's socialists, who have completely abandoned this idea of truth, other people have not, they only think they have, only acknowledge the kind of truth where developments can be foreseen. Quote, gaining insight in order to foresee, close quote, was Auguste Comte's motto. And that is a radical reversal of the idea of truth in our time. But we can only grasp nature with this idea of truth. And people are under a colossal illusion in this respect. They think, for instance, that they are able to grasp historical life with Auguste Comte's notion of truth. But one cannot do this. Nor can one do so with the old ordeal notion of truth. But that was influenced by the life illusion. Our present-day idea of truth is under the influence of the mind being deceived. There will have to be the idea of truth developed out of anthroposophy, a concept of truth that is gained in a much more comprehensive way than the way in which Augustine, for example, arrived at his idea of truth. As I have shown, this was subject to a delusion. This is connected with many things and very much depends on it. It is not enough to speak of an evolution of the idea of truth in abstract terms. We have to know in detail how the idea of truth takes the human soul in different directions depending on the nature of this idea of truth. It is an anachronism to speak of nationality the way it could be done in pre-Christian times. Then it was not just that people were thinking that the divine order extended into the human order. It truly was so. Now it no longer extends into it. So, where people today cling to natural orders, to things merely brought about by birth following birth, the national principle, for instance, we are in an anachronism. People are forced today to look for different structures for their social order in post-Christian times, structures that are not determined from outside. People of earlier times were able to consider their nationality because they saw this as an institution of the divine order and saw life on earth as a reflection of the divine order. Modern man cannot venerate the nation itself as something special in the same way without falling into anachronism. We must endeavor to find different social structures. To venerate the nation as something special would lead to the Ahrimanic deception of today. Nations are leftovers from pre-Christian times. And modern humanity must get beyond that by developing in the way which I have mentioned. We have to realize how much people are seeking a special form of the truth concept, This is important, even if it is awkward at the present time. If we are unbiased in taking the standpoint of truly grasping reality, we will have to accept many an uncomfortable truth. People are today literally moving toward the true aim of anthroposophy. The philosophy of life, which had Auguste Comte as its particular representative, is limited to the natural order outside. There is need to advance again into the spiritual world, and a bridge must be built between reality and ideality. This is indeed what I want to refer to particularly in these lectures. It will not happen, however, if we merely talk of these things, but only if we grasp the concrete impulses in the world. For this, we must look wholly without bias at certain facts. Strange facts are connected with the things we are now considering. Just think, yesterday I spoke to you about Saint Simon and Auguste Comte. Both were only considering positivist science to matter. That is, anything relating to sense-perceptible life, to the causal natural order. And yet there is the strange fact that Auguste Comte turned away from Saint Simon, his teacher and guide, because Saint Simon had become too much of a mystic in old age. The strange fact is that Saint Simon as well as Auguste Comte were, on the one hand, basing themselves firmly on the ground of Ahrimanic science, consciously basing themselves on Ahrimanic science in the industrial age, and then to turn mystic. Strange. It is a strange fact. We have to inquire into the why of such a fact. The why of such a fact will, however, only show itself if we take an unbiased view of the way in which human beings are seeking spirituality. Many people who, like Auguste Comte and Saint Simon, intended to go only by the natural order, are moving toward spirituality. Now there is something most peculiar in the human life of more recent times. Take another fact, looking at it wholly without bias, without any kind of national chauvinism, which does not become us. In the views that arise as the flower of more recent national characteristics, something is characteristic in a way which is to be found down below in these national characters. Starting from this, I'd refer you to another fact, to Bentham, very much a trend-setting English philosopher who lived from 1748 to 1832. Bentham may be said to have been characteristic of his people's way of thinking. In a sense, Bentham's way of thinking has been called utilitarian, also utilitarian in a deeper sense. There is a particular principle behind his thinking that relates to the ideal world order. This principle is usually also referred to as, quote, the greatest happiness principle, close quote. This human happiness is, according to Bentham, that the good, that is, the ideal to aim for, consisted in the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people on earth. Let us really look at this. The good is the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people on earth. This is indeed a key element in utilitarian philosophy. We have to consider that those words have been called absolutely Ahrimanic, not by Bentham and his followers, but by people who take the spiritual point of view. Occultists in his own country have said that Bentham produced this, in quotes, utterly devilish statement. They called it devilish, for according to those occultists, if it were the case that the good consists in the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, then evil would consist in the greatest happiness for the smallest number of people. This is not something which I myself want to present as a definition or explication. It is what people say. So on the one hand, the English philosophy of Bentham, greatest happiness. On the other hand, English spiritualists saying, Bentham's thesis is absolutely devilish, for in that case evil would mean the greatest happiness for the smallest number of people. The conclusion would be that evil and happiness could exist together, and a spiritualist cannot accept that under any circumstances. I am merely presenting a fact in cultural life, which is most eminently significant for the most tremendous opposition existing between spiritualists and the outward philosophy of life in a particular area on earth. Having said that in tomorrow's talk these oppositions will be resolved, I am ending today's talk with a succinct statement. You can take three things: Goetheanism, Comteanism, and Benthamism. These relate in three different ways to humanity's spiritual striving for the future. German Goetheanism, as such, has the potential to develop into spiritualism. French Comteanism is such that spiritualism can develop alongside it, like the strange mysticism alongside the positivist philosophy of Auguste Comte and Saint-Simon. With the English utilitarianism, Benthamism, the only thing that can arise is the most severe opposition of spiritualists to the popular view. This is a fundamental part of evolution itself. French nature has to evolve in such a way that idealism and realism, mysticism and positivism, can run side by side. In England, within essential British nature, things will more and more go in a direction where the people who become spiritualists there will gradually have to fight more and more against their own national characteristics, that is, against the flowers of the philosophies of their nation. As to Auguste Comte, I am not presenting theories, but also giving you the facts, or at least some of them. When he had turned to positivism, he abandoned his teacher Saint-Simon, but there was such a distinct inclination toward mysticism at the end of his life, he clearly accepted a trinity. He venerated three things: the great fetish, the great medium, and the great spirit. And as he said that the great fetish was the womb of humanity in space, space was the medium from which humanity arose as from the womb. The great spirit is humanity spread out over the earth in abstract terms. Auguste Comte acknowledged this trinity, a strange combination of positivism and mysticism. We'll say more of this tomorrow.